The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace, casting long shadows across the polished floors as Catherine Wales sat quietly in her private study. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the phone, listening to her doctor's voice explaining the results of her latest tests. The words seemed to echo in the spacious room, bouncing off the ornate walls that had witnessed centuries of royal conversations, but none quite like this one. "Your Royal Highness, I'm pleased to inform you that your treatment has been remarkably successful." Dr. Harrison's voice carried a warmth that immediately brought tears to Catherine's eyes. "The cancer is in complete remission." Catherine closed her eyes, feeling the weight of months of uncertainty finally lifting from her shoulders. She had kept her diagnosis private, sharing it only with William and her closest family members, determined to handle her treatment with the same grace and dignity she brought to every aspect of her royal duties. The chemotherapy sessions, the sleepless nights, the fear that gripped her heart whenever she looked at her 3 children, it all seemed like a distant nightmare now. "Thank you, doctor," she whispered, her voice catching slightly. "Thank you so much." After ending the call, Catherine sat in silence for several minutes, allowing herself to truly absorb the news. She thought about the past year, how she had continued her royal engagements while secretly battling for her life, how she had smiled for photographers while inside she was fighting the greatest battle she had ever faced. The irony wasn't lost on her that some of her most impactful charitable work had happened during her darkest personal moments. William found her there an hour later, still sitting in the same chair, tears streaming down her face. He didn't need to ask, the expression on her face told him everything he needed to know. Without a word, he crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, both of them finally allowing themselves to believe that their nightmare was over. "The children," Catherine whispered against his shoulder. "We can finally tell them that Mummy is going to be okay." That afternoon, as Catherine walked through the gardens of their Norfolk home, she felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. The autumn leaves crunched beneath her feet, and she stopped to watch George, Charlotte, and Louis playing on their tire swing, their laughter carrying on the crisp air. These were the moments she had feared she might miss, the simple, precious memories that made life worth fighting for. Her phone buzzed with a message from her private secretary. British Vogue wanted to meet with her about a potential collaboration, something about celebrating women who had made significant impacts in various fields. Catherine smiled, thinking about how perfect the timing was. She had so much she wanted to share with the world, so many causes close to her heart that she could finally pursue with renewed energy and purpose. That evening, as she tucked her children into bed, Charlotte looked up at her with those perceptive blue eyes that reminded Catherine so much of William. "Mummy, you seem different today." "Happy different." Catherine smoothed her daughter's hair back from her forehead, marveling at how children could sense things that adults often missed. "I am happy, darling. Very happy." "Are you going to keep being happy?" Louis asked from his bed across the room, his small voice filled with the kind of hope that only children possess. "I'm certainly going to try," Catherine replied, meaning every word. Later that night, Catherine stood on the balcony of their bedroom, looking out at the stars scattered across the Norfolk sky. William joined her, wrapping a warm blanket around both their shoulders as they stood together in comfortable silence. "I've been thinking about what comes next," Catherine said softly. "About how I want to use this second chance." William nodded, understanding without need for explanation. They had both changed over the past year, had both learned what truly mattered in life. The royal duties would continue, the public appearances and charitable work would go on, but now they would be infused with a deeper purpose, a more authentic understanding of human struggle and triumph. "British Vogue wants to meet with me," Catherine continued. "I think it might be time to share more of myself with the world. Not just the polished royal version, but the real me, the woman who has struggled, who has fears, who has learned that strength isn't about never falling down, it's about getting back up." William squeezed her hand gently. "The world needs to see that side of you. It always has." The next morning brought a flurry of activity as Catherine's team began planning her return to full royal duties. She had been selective about her appearances during treatment, choosing only the most important events and causes closest to her heart. Now, with her health restored, she felt ready to take on new challenges and expand her impact. Her first stop was the Royal Marsden Hospital, where she had received her treatment. Walking through the corridors as a patron rather than a patient felt surreal, but Catherine was determined to use her experience to bring attention to the incredible work being done there. She spent hours talking with patients, sharing quiet moments of understanding that needed no words. "Your Royal Highness," said one young mother, clutching Catherine's hand tightly. "Knowing that you went through this too, it gives me hope that I can be strong for my children." Catherine felt her heart swell with emotion. "You already are strong," she replied. "Stronger than you know." As she left the hospital that day, Catherine felt a profound shift in her understanding of her role as a royal. It wasn't just about cutting ribbons and attending galas, it was about being a bridge between the monarchy and the people, about showing that behind the titles and tiaras, they were all human beings facing the same fears, hopes, and challenges. The call from British Vogue came that week. The magazine wanted to create a special issue celebrating women who had overcome adversity to create positive change in the world. They had been following Catherine's work for years, but something about her recent approach to her royal duties had caught their attention, a new depth, of authenticity that resonated with people across all walks of life. "We'd like to feature you as our cover story," the editor explained during their phone conversation. "But we're not interested in the usual royal interview. We want to explore the real Catherine, the woman behind the title, the mother, the advocate, the survivor." Catherine felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with excitement. Opening up to that degree would be unprecedented for a member of the royal family, but she knew it was time. The world was changing, and the monarchy needed to change with it. People were looking for authentic connections, for leaders who understood their struggles and could offer genuine hope. "I'd like to do this," Catherine said, surprising herself with how quickly the decision came. "But I want to do it right. I want to use this platform to highlight the causes and people that matter most." Over the following weeks, Catherine threw herself into preparing for what would become one of the most significant interviews of her royal career. She visited homeless shelters where she had worked quietly for years, sat with families affected by addiction, and spent time at children's hospitals where her early childhood development work had made real differences in young lives. Each visit reinforced her belief that her personal struggles had prepared her for this moment, that her experience with cancer, her fears as a mother, her challenges in adapting to royal life, had all been building towards something larger than herself. One particularly moving visit took her to a refuge for women fleeing domestic violence. Catherine had been supporting the organization privately for years, but now she wanted to bring public attention to their work. As she sat with a group of women sharing their stories, she felt compelled to share her own, not about cancer, which was still too private, but about the fears and uncertainties that every woman faces. "I think we all have moments when we feel like we're not strong enough," Catherine said, her voice gentle but firm. "When we question whether we can handle what life throws at us. But every day, I see women like all of you proving that we're capable of far more than we ever imagined." The women in the room nodded, and Catherine realized that her royal title had become secondary to her identity as a fellow human being. This was what she wanted to bring to the Vogue interview, not just her story, but the stories of all the people who had taught her what real strength looked like. As she drove home that evening, Catherine felt a deep sense of purpose settling over her. The cancer had taken so much from her, months of her life, precious time with her children, moments of carefree happiness. But it had also given her something invaluable, a clearer understanding of what mattered most and the courage to use her platform in service of something greater than herself. The preliminary meeting with British Vogue was scheduled for the following week. Catherine spent the weekend walking through the countryside with William and the children, drawing strength from the simple pleasure of being alive and healthy with her family. As she watched her children chase each other through the fields, their laughter echoing across the landscape, she felt ready to share her story with the world. Sunday evening found her in her study again, this time not waiting for test results but preparing to write a new chapter of her life. She pulled out a notebook and began jotting down thoughts about the women who had inspired her, the causes that had shaped her, and the message she wanted to share with the millions of people who had read her words. At the top of the page, she wrote, "Strength is not about never falling. It's about rising every time we fall, and helping others do the same." She had no idea that this interview would launch a series of events that would change not only her own life but the lives of countless women around the world. She simply knew that she had been given a second chance at life, and she was determined not to waste it. The British Vogue offices in London buzzed with an energy that Catherine had never experienced before. Unlike the formal, carefully orchestrated royal events she was accustomed to, this felt alive and creative, with staff members rushing between desks carrying layouts, fabric swatches, and mood boards. Editor-in-Chief Sarah Mitchell greeted Catherine with a warm smile that immediately put her at ease. "Your Royal Highness, thank you so much for agreeing to this," Sarah said, leading Catherine through the open office space. "I have to tell you, when we pitched this story, everyone was incredibly excited. Your work over the past few years has been remarkable, but there's something different about your recent approach that we felt needed to be shared." Catherine nodded, feeling a mix of nervousness and anticipation. She had spent sleepless nights wondering if she was making the right decision, if opening up so publicly was what the royal family needed or if it would create unwanted controversy. But, deep down, she knew this was her moment to bridge the gap between the monarchy and the people in a way that had never been done before. The conference room where they settled for their preliminary discussion was filled with natural light and decorated with covers from past issues featuring women who had changed the world. Catherine's eyes lingered on each cover: scientists, activists, artists, leaders, women who had used their voices and platforms to create meaningful change. "We want this to be different," Sarah explained, spreading out preliminary concepts across the table. "Not a traditional royal interview, but a conversation about real impact, real challenges, real growth. We know you've been through something significant recently, and we can see how it's influenced your work." Catherine took a deep breath. She had practiced this moment in her mind countless times, but, sitting here in this creative space, surrounded by people who understood the power of storytelling, she felt ready to be truly vulnerable. "I have been through something life-changing," Catherine began slowly. "And, you're right, it has completely transformed how I see my role, my responsibilities, and my opportunity to make a difference." Over the next 2 hours, Catherine shared more about herself than she had in any previous interview. She talked about her early struggles adapting to royal life, the pressure of constant public scrutiny, and her journey to find her authentic voice within the constraints of tradition. She spoke about her passion for early childhood development, her work with mental health initiatives, and her growing understanding of how privilege could be transformed into purpose. "I think for a long time, I focused on doing things correctly," Catherine reflected, her hands gesturing expressively as she spoke. "Following protocol, meeting expectations, not making waves. But I've learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is be real with people, even if it's uncomfortable." Sarah and her team listened intently, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that pushed Catherine to dig deeper into her motivations and experiences. As the conversation progressed, Catherine felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, the weight of always having to be perfect, always having to have the right answer, always having to maintain a careful distance from the very people she was trying to serve. "There's one story I'd like to share," Catherine said as their initial meeting was winding down. "About a young mother I met at a children's hospital last month. Her daughter was facing a difficult diagnosis, and this mother was trying so hard to be strong for everyone around her. She apologized for crying when we talked, as if showing emotion was somehow a failure." Catherine paused, remembering the moment vividly. "I told her that tears aren't a sign of weakness, they're a sign that we care deeply about something." That conversation changed me because I realized I had been apologizing for my own emotions for years, thinking that being royal meant never showing vulnerability. The room was quiet for a moment, everyone absorbing the weight of Catherine's words. Sarah leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "That's exactly the kind of authenticity we want to capture in this piece," she said. "The world needs to see leaders who understand that strength and vulnerability aren't opposites, they're partners." As Catherine left the Vogue offices that day, she felt energized in a way she hadn't experienced in months. The creative energy of the environment, the meaningful conversation about using her platform for real change, the possibility of connecting with people on a deeper level, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. Her next stop was a surprise visit to a women's shelter in South London, an organization she had been supporting privately for over 2 years. The shelter provided temporary housing and support services for women escaping domestic violence, and Catherine had been working behind the scenes with their leadership team to develop programs that address not just immediate safety needs but long-term healing and empowerment. Walking through the shelter's doors, Catherine was greeted by Maria Santos, the director, who had become both a colleague and a friend over their years of collaboration. "Catherine!" Maria exclaimed, using the informal address that Catherine had insisted upon during their private work together. "Perfect timing. We have some wonderful news to share." Maria led Catherine through the facility, explaining how their recent funding increase had allowed them to expand their childcare services and add a new job training program. As they walked, Catherine observed the careful attention to creating a warm, non-institutional environment, soft lighting, comfortable furniture, children's artwork on the walls. "The women we serve have often been told they're not capable of independence," Maria explained as they entered a bright classroom where a group of women were learning computer skills. "Our job is to help them rediscover their own strength." Catherine spent the afternoon sitting with women in various stages of their healing journeys. She listened to stories of courage that humbled her, conversations about rebuilding lives that inspired her, and discussions about hopes and dreams that reminded her why this work mattered so much. One woman, Sarah, shared how the shelter's job training program had helped her secure employment as a medical receptionist, her first job in over a decade. "I thought I had lost myself completely," Sarah explained, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "But the counselors here helped me remember who I was before all the bad things happened. Now I look at my daughter and I know I'm showing her what it means to be a strong woman." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes as she listened. These women were teaching her as much as any royal advisor ever had about leadership, resilience, and the power of human connection. "What you've accomplished takes incredible courage," Catherine told the group. "You're not just changing your own lives, you're changing the trajectory for your children and showing other women that it's possible to rebuild." As she prepared to leave the shelter, Maria walked Catherine to her car, both women reflecting on how much their partnership had grown over the past 2 years. "I have to ask," Maria said carefully, "the Vogue interview, are you planning to talk about this kind of work?" Catherine nodded. "I want people to understand that royal work isn't just about ceremonial duties. It's about using whatever platform you have to address real problems and support real solutions. This shelter, the work you're doing here, it's changing lives every day. That deserves attention. The women here will be so proud to know their stories might inspire others," Maria replied. "You've given them dignity by treating their experiences as valuable, not just as charity cases." That evening, Catherine returned to Kensington Palace with her heart full and her mind racing with ideas for how to best use the Vogue platform. She found William in their private sitting room, helping Charlotte with her homework while George and Louis played quietly nearby. "How was your day?" William asked, looking up from Charlotte's mathematics worksheet. "Inspiring," Catherine replied, settling onto the sofa beside them. "I think I'm finally understanding what I'm supposed to do with this role, this platform, this opportunity." Charlotte looked up from her homework with curiosity. "Mummy, what's a platform?" Catherine smiled, thinking about how to explain something so complex to her 8-year-old daughter. "Well, sweetheart, a platform is like having a really loud voice that lots of people can hear. Some people get platforms because they're famous, or they're good at something, or because of their job. The important thing is using that loud voice to help people who might not have loud voices of their own." "Like speaking up for people who need help?" Charlotte asked. "Exactly like that," Catherine confirmed, impressed by her daughter's quick understanding. William squeezed Catherine's hand, recognizing the passion in her voice that had been growing stronger over the past few months. He had watched her transform her approach to royal duties, moving from dutiful participation to genuine leadership, and he couldn't have been prouder of the woman she was becoming. Later that night, Catherine sat in her study working on notes for the upcoming Vogue shoot and interview. She wanted to ensure that every aspect of the piece, from the photos to the conversation topics to the causes highlighted, reflected her authentic self and the issues that mattered most to her. She made lists of the organizations she wanted to mention, the stories she wanted to share, and the messages she hoped to convey. At the top of her priorities list, she wrote, "Show that royals are human beings who struggle, grow, and learn just like everyone else." Her phone rang, interrupting her planning session. It was her mother, Carol, calling for their weekly check-in. "How are you feeling about this magazine interview, darling?" Carol asked, her voice warm with motherly concern. Catherine leaned back in her chair, considering the question seriously. Nervous but excited. I think it's time, Mum. Time to show people who I really am, not just who they expect me to be. You've always been someone special, Catherine, Carol replied. I'm proud of you for having the courage to share that with the world. After ending the call, Catherine returned to her planning, but her mother's words stayed with her. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this point, from a middle-class girl in Berkshire to a royal duchess, from someone trying to fit into an existing mold to someone ready to help reshape what modern royalty could look like. The next morning brought a call from Sarah Mitchell at Vogue with exciting news about the photoshoot concepts they had developed. The magazine wanted to capture Catherine in various settings that reflected her real work and passions, not just formal palace portraits, but images that showed her authentic engagement with the causes she championed. We're thinking about photographing you at some of the organizations you work with, Sarah explained. Really showing you in action rather than just posed formally. Would that appeal to you? Catherine felt a thrill of excitement. I love that idea. I want people to see that royal work isn't just about appearing at events, it's about building relationships and creating real change. They discussed possibilities, Catherine working with children at a nursery school where she had been developing early childhood programs, meeting with researchers at the Royal Marsden Hospital where she supported cancer research, visiting with women at the shelter where she had been working behind the scenes. There's one other location I'd like to suggest, Catherine said, thinking about a place that had become increasingly important to her over the past year. My home in Norfolk. Not the grand rooms, but the garden where I spend time with my children. I think it's important for people to see that part of my life too, the mother, the woman who finds peace and strength in simple moments. Sarah was immediately enthusiastic about the idea. That's perfect. We want to show all dimensions of who you are. As they finalized plans for the shoot, Catherine felt a growing sense of anticipation. This project was becoming something much larger than a traditional royal interview. It was becoming an opportunity to redefine what it meant to be a modern royal, to show that titles and tradition could coexist with authenticity and innovation. The weeks leading up to the shoot were filled with preparation, but Catherine also made sure to maintain her regular schedule of royal duties and family time. She attended the opening of a new children's wing at a London hospital, hosted a reception for mental health advocates, and participated in her children's school events, all while planning for what she knew would be a pivotal moment in her public life. Each engagement reinforced her belief that she was on the right path, that opening up to the world about her real experiences and passions would ultimately serve both the monarchy and the people it existed to serve. The morning of the British Vogue photoshoot dawned crisp and clear at Anmer Hall, their Norfolk retreat. Catherine stood at her bedroom window, watching the early sunlight filter through the ancient oak trees that surrounded their private sanctuary. Today felt different, significant in a way that made her heart race with both excitement and nervousness. She was about to share parts of herself with the world that she had kept carefully guarded for over a decade. William appeared beside her, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they looked out at the landscape where their children played and where they had found their most peaceful moments as a family. Ready for this? He asked softly, understanding the magnitude of what today represented. Catherine leaned back against him, drawing strength from his steady presence. I think so. It feels right, but also terrifying. I keep thinking about all the ways this could be misunderstood or criticized. You're doing this for the right reasons, William reminded her. People need to see the real you, the woman I fell in love with, the mother our children adore, the advocate who genuinely cares about making a difference. The first location for the shoot was the children's nursery where Catherine had been quietly developing her early childhood programs for the past 3 years. As she walked through the bright, colorful rooms filled with tiny chairs and educational toys, she felt the familiar sense of purpose that always came when she was working with young children. The photographer, Annie Leibovitz, had been carefully chosen for her ability to capture authentic moments rather than stiff formal portraits. As Annie set up her equipment, Catherine sat on the floor with a group of 3-year-olds, reading them a story about courage and kindness. The children gathered around her naturally, some leaning against her shoulders, others sitting cross-legged and listening intently. This is beautiful, Annie murmured as she began shooting, capturing the genuine interaction between Catherine and the children. They're completely comfortable with you. Catherine smiled, turning the page of the picture book while a little girl named Emma climbed into her lap. Children always know when you're being real with them. They can sense authenticity in a way that adults sometimes can't. The morning session produced some of the most natural photographs ever taken of Catherine in her royal role. There were no formal poses or carefully arranged settings, just honest moments of connection between a woman who cared deeply about early childhood development and the children who benefited from her work. During a break between shots, Catherine sat with Dr. Rebecca Chen, the nursery director who had become one of her most trusted collaborators in developing evidence-based early intervention programs. "The children always light up when you visit," Dr. Chen observed. "But today feels different. You seem more present, if that makes sense." Catherine nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "I think I've finally stopped trying to be who I thought I should be and started being who I actually am." The next location was the Royal Marsden Hospital, where Catherine had been a patron for years but which now held deeply personal significance following her own cancer journey. Walking through the corridors where she had once been a patient, Catherine felt a complex mix of emotions: gratitude for her recovery, empathy for those still fighting, and determination to use her experience to make a difference. Annie photographed Catherine meeting with patients in the children's cancer ward, and the images captured something profound: genuine understanding passing between people who had faced similar fears. When a young teenager named Marcus showed Catherine a drawing he had made during his treatment, depicting himself as a superhero fighting cancer cells, Catherine's emotional response was immediate and unguarded. "You are a superhero," Catherine told him, her voice thick with emotion. "What you're facing takes more courage than anything I've ever seen." The photograph Annie captured of that moment, Catherine looking directly into Marcus's eyes with complete attention and understanding, would later become one of the most powerful images from the entire shoot. Dr. Sarah Williams, who had been part of Catherine's care team, joined them for a portion of the session. As they walked through the research laboratories where groundbreaking cancer treatments were being developed, Catherine listened intently to explanations of new protocols and emerging therapies. "The work being done here gives me so much hope," Catherine said as Annie photographed her examining research data with the scientific team. "Every breakthrough here could mean that families won't have to face what mine did." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway, applause and cheering from staff members who had gathered to welcome Catherine's visit. But this wasn't the usual formal royal reception. Doctors, nurses, researchers, and support staff had come together spontaneously, many of them holding signs thanking her for her support of cancer research. One of the nurses, Janet Morrison, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "Your Royal Highness, we wanted you to know how much your advocacy means to us. The funding and attention you've brought to our work here, it's saving lives every day." Catherine felt overwhelmed by the emotion in the room. These weren't people greeting a royal because protocol required it, these were healthcare heroes expressing genuine gratitude for her support of their life-saving work. "Thank you," Catherine said, addressing the entire group. "But you're the one saving lives. I'm just grateful I can help bring attention to the incredible work you do." Annie captured the entire spontaneous moment, understanding that this authentic interaction was exactly what the magazine wanted to showcase: real connections between Catherine and the people whose work she supported. The final location was perhaps the most personal: the gardens at Anmer Hall, where Catherine found her peace and where her children had grown up surrounded by nature rather than royal formality. As afternoon light filtered through the trees, Catherine walked the familiar paths where she had processed her cancer diagnosis, celebrated her recovery, and planned for this new chapter of her public life. George, Charlotte, and Louis had been allowed to participate in this portion of the shoot, and Annie captured beautiful family moments as they explored the garden together. The images showed a different side of royal life: children climbing trees, a mother pushing her son on a swing, a family sharing quiet conversations on a garden bench. "This is where I come to remember what matters most," Catherine explained to Annie as they sat in her favorite corner of the garden, surrounded by the flowers she had planted herself over the years. "Royal duties are important, but this, being present for my children, creating a stable foundation for our family, this is everything." Charlotte approached them with a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked, presenting them to her mother with the kind of natural grace that seemed to run in the family. "For you, Mummy, because you're the best mummy in the world," Charlotte said simply. Annie's camera captured the moment perfectly. Catherine's face filled with pure maternal love as she accepted her daughter's gift, the late afternoon light creating a golden glow around them. As the photoshoot wound down, Catherine felt emotionally drained but profoundly satisfied. She had shared parts of herself that she had never revealed publicly before, and it felt liberating rather than exposing. The interview portion was scheduled for the following day, but Sarah Mitchell arrived that evening to join Catherine for dinner and informal conversation. They sat in the cozy kitchen at Anmer Hall, sharing a simple meal while discussing the themes they wanted to explore in their formal interview. "Today was incredible," Sarah said, reviewing some of the preliminary images on Annie's camera. "You can see the authenticity in every shot. There's something magical that happens when someone stops performing and starts just being." Catherine nodded, feeling the truth of those words deeply. "I think I've been performing for so long that I almost forgot who I really was underneath all the expectations." "What changed?" Sarah asked gently. Catherine was quiet for a moment, considering how much to share about her cancer journey. She had decided to keep that part of her story private for now, but she could speak to the broader transformation it had sparked. "I had a wake-up call," Catherine said finally. "Something that made me realize that life is too short and too precious to spend it trying to be perfect instead of trying to be real." They talked late into the evening about Catherine's vision for modern royalty, her passion for the causes she championed, and her hopes for how this magazine feature might inspire other women to embrace their authentic selves while using whatever platform they had to create positive change. "I want people to understand that having a title or a platform comes with responsibility," Catherine explained. "Not just the responsibility to behave correctly, but the responsibility to use that platform meaningfully." Sarah smiled, recognizing that she was witnessing something historic, a senior royal choosing vulnerability over protocol, authenticity over tradition, and genuine connection over careful distance. The next morning brought the formal interview session, conducted in Catherine's study at Anmer Hall. The room reflected her personality perfectly: comfortable furniture, family photographs mixed with royal portraits, books about child development and psychology alongside classic literature. As they settled into their conversation, Catherine felt nervous but determined. She had prepared by reflecting on the key messages she wanted to share, but she was also ready to be spontaneous, to let the conversation flow naturally rather than sticking rigidly to talking points. "Let's start with something simple," Sarah suggested. "How would you describe yourself to someone who only knows you from newspaper headlines?" Catherine laughed, immediately feeling more relaxed. "I think I'm much more ordinary than people expect. I'm a mother who worries about whether her children are kind to others at school. I'm a wife who sometimes burns dinner when I'm distracted by work. I'm a woman who has struggled with confidence and self-doubt, who has had to learn how to use my voice effectively." "That's quite different from the perfect royal image that's often portrayed," Sarah observed. "Perfection is an illusion that doesn't serve anyone," Catherine replied firmly. "When we pretend that we don't struggle, we make it harder for other people to share their own struggles. When we act like we have all the answers, we stop learning from the people around us." They discussed Catherine's work with early childhood development, her advocacy for mental health awareness, and her support for women facing domestic violence. With each topic, Catherine's passion became more evident, her carefully maintained royal composure giving way to genuine emotion and conviction. "The work with women's shelters has been particularly meaningful to me," Catherine shared. "These are women who have shown incredible courage in leaving dangerous situations, often with nothing but their children and hope for a better future. They've taught me more about real strength than any leadership course ever could." Sarah was struck by how Catherine spoke about the people she worked with, not as charity cases or causes, but as teachers and partners in the work of creating positive change. "It sounds like your approach to royal duties has evolved significantly," Sarah noted. "Completely," Catherine agreed. "I used to think my job was to show up, be gracious, and not make any mistakes. Now I understand that my job is to listen, to learn, and to use whatever influence I have to amplify the voices and work of people who are actually creating solutions to real problems." As the interview continued, Catherine found herself sharing stories she had never told publicly before, about the early days of royal life when she felt overwhelmed and unprepared, about learning to navigate the constant scrutiny while trying to maintain her sense of self, about the moment she realized that her platform could be a powerful tool for good if she was willing to use it authentically. What do you hope people take away from reading this article? Sarah asked as their formal interview session neared its end. Catherine considered the question carefully, thinking about all the people who had inspired her, the cancer patients showing daily courage, the mothers rebuilding their lives after trauma, the children teaching her about resilience and joy. I hope they see that everyone has the power to make a difference, regardless of their title or platform, Catherine said finally. And I hope they understand that real strength comes not from never falling down, but from getting back up and helping others do the same. 3 months later, Catherine stood nervously in her private sitting room at Kensington Palace, holding the advance copy of British Vogue that had arrived that morning. The cover featured the photograph Annie had taken of her in the hospital research laboratory, surrounded by scientists working on breakthrough cancer treatments. The image perfectly captured what the magazine had set out to achieve, Catherine not as a distant royal figure, but as a woman genuinely engaged in meaningful work. The headline read simply, "The Real Catherine, A Royal's Journey to Authentic Leadership." Below it, in smaller text, the Princess of Wales opens up about finding her voice, using her platform, and why vulnerability is the ultimate strength. William found her there an hour later, still staring at the magazine with a mixture of pride and terror. "How do you feel?" he asked, settling beside her on the sofa. "Like I just jumped off a cliff and I'm not sure if I'm flying or falling," Catherine admitted, her hands trembling slightly as she turned through the pages. The article was everything she had hoped it would be and everything she feared it might become. Sarah Mitchell had crafted a piece that revealed Catherine's authentic self while maintaining the respect and dignity befitting her royal position. The photographs showed her in ways the public had never seen, completely absorbed in her work with children, emotionally connected with cancer patients, relaxed and natural with her own family. But it was the quotes that made Catherine's heart race. Reading her own words about struggle, growth, and the responsibility that comes with privilege, she wondered how they would be received by the public, the press, and, most importantly, by the royal family itself. Her phone had been buzzing all morning with messages from her private secretary, communications team, and various palace officials. The magazine wouldn't hit newsstands for another week, but advance copies had been circulating among media outlets and royal correspondents since dawn. "Palace sources say this is unprecedented," her private secretary had texted. But the early response seems incredibly positive. The first major test came that afternoon when Catherine attended a previously scheduled visit to a primary school in East London. As her car approached the school, she could see crowds of people lining the street, far more than usual for a routine royal engagement. "Looks like word is getting out," said her protection officer, scanning the enthusiastic crowd. Catherine took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders as she prepared to face what might be a very different kind of public interaction than she was used to. The moment she stepped out of the car, the difference was palpable. The cheers from the crowd were warmer, more personal. People were holding signs that read "Thank you for being real" and "Your courage inspires us." Several women in the crowd were openly crying, reaching out not just to touch her hand but to make eye contact, to connect with the woman they had read about in the advance coverage. "Your Royal Highness," called out one young mother holding a toddler. "My daughter is going through treatment at the Marsden. Thank you for everything you do there." Catherine felt her throat tighten with emotion. She had expected criticism, controversy, perhaps accusations that she had overshared or stepped outside traditional royal bounds. She hadn't expected this outpouring of gratitude and connection. Inside the school, the visit took on an entirely different quality than her usual engagements. Teachers, parents, and even the children seemed to relate to her differently, not as an untouchable royal figure, but as someone they felt they knew and understood. During a reading session with a group of 6-year-olds, one little boy named Ahmed raised his hand and said, "Miss Catherine, my mummy says you help other mummies who are sad." "Is that true?" Catherine felt her careful royal composure waver for a moment. The directness of children always cut straight through pretense to the heart of things. "Yes, Ahmed," she replied, sitting cross-legged on the classroom floor. "I try to help people who are going through difficult times, because I think it's important that we take care of each other. My mummy was sad when Daddy went away," Ahmed continued with the matter-of-fact honesty of childhood. "But she's better now because people helped her." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes as she realized that Ahmed's mother might have been helped by one of the organizations she supported. The connection between her royal work and real lives had never felt more immediate or meaningful. As the school visit concluded, Catherine found herself surrounded by parents wanting to share their own stories. Women talked about struggles with mental health, families dealing with illness, mothers trying to rebuild their lives after difficult circumstances. The conversation that had begun with the Vogue article was continuing in real time, creating connections she had never experienced in over a decade of royal duties. That evening, the palace communications team briefed Catherine on the media response to the article's early release. The coverage was overwhelmingly positive, but, more importantly, it was sparking conversations about topics that mattered: mental health, domestic violence prevention, cancer research funding, early childhood development. The BBC wants to do a follow-up interview, her communications director informed her. Good Morning America is requesting an exclusive. And, we've received over 1,000 emails today from organizations wanting to work with you. But, it was the personal messages that moved Catherine most deeply. Her private social media accounts, normally restricted to close family and friends, were flooded with messages from women sharing their own stories of struggle and recovery, thanking her for making them feel less alone. One message, from a young mother named Lisa, particularly touched her. Your Royal Highness, I've been in hiding from my abusive ex-husband for 6 months with my 2 children. Reading your words about strength coming from getting back up gave me the courage to finally reach out to a women's shelter. Thank you for showing me that asking for help isn't giving up, it's fighting back. William found Catherine in her study that night, tears streaming down her face as she read through hundreds of similar messages. I had no idea, she whispered to him. I had no idea that sharing my own experience would give other people permission to share theirs. This is what you were meant to do, William said firmly, pulling her into his arms. You've given people something they desperately needed, the example of someone in a position of authority being honest about struggle and growth. The days following the article's official release brought a whirlwind of activity unlike anything Catherine had experienced. The magazine sold out within hours of hitting newsstands, with additional printings ordered to meet demand. The online version crashed the Vogue website temporarily due to traffic volume. More importantly, the organizations Catherine had highlighted in the interview saw immediate impacts. The Women's Shelter received their largest donation in history within 48 hours of the article's release. The Royal Marsden Hospital was contacted by dozens of potential research collaborators and funders. Early childhood development programs across the country reported increased volunteer applications and funding inquiries. Catherine's calendar, usually planned months in advance, had to be completely restructured to accommodate the flood of requests for visits, partnerships, and collaborations. But these weren't the typical ceremonial royal duties she was accustomed to. These were invitations to engage in substantive work on issues she cared deeply about. A week after the article's release, Catherine received an invitation that particularly excited her. The United Nations wanted her to speak at their annual Women's Empowerment Summit, specifically about using platforms of privilege to amplify marginalized voices. This is exactly what I hoped would happen, Catherine told Sarah Mitchell during a follow-up phone call. The conversation has moved beyond me and my story to focus on the real work that needs to be done. But the impact wasn't limited to official channels. Catherine began noticing changes in her everyday interactions with people. During a grocery shopping trip with her children in Norfolk, something she had always done privately to maintain some normalcy for her family, she was approached by several women who wanted to share their own stories. Instead of the usual polite but distant royal encounters, these conversations were deep and meaningful. A young mother struggling with postpartum depression thanked Catherine for talking openly about mental health. An elderly woman whose husband was battling cancer spoke about how Catherine's hospital visits had given her hope during her own dark moments. "Mummy," Charlotte asked during the car ride home, "why do people want to talk to you so much more than they used to?" Catherine considered how to explain the complex concept to her daughter. "I think it's because I started talking to them like real people instead of just being polite," she said finally. "But, weren't you always real?" Louis asked from the back seat, with the kind of logical confusion that only children possess. "I was real," Catherine replied, "but I was trying so hard to be perfect that people couldn't see the real me." The conversation with her children crystallized something Catherine had been feeling but couldn't quite articulate. The Vogue article hadn't changed who she was, it had simply allowed her to stop hiding who she was. 3 weeks after the article's release, Catherine attended the annual Royal Variety performance, an event she had attended countless times before but which now felt completely different. As she walked down the red carpet, photographers and reporters were asking different questions. Instead of inquiring about her dress or her children, journalists were asking about her plans for expanding her advocacy work, about her thoughts on using celebrity platforms for social change, about her advice for young women trying to find their authentic voices. "Your Royal Highness," called out one reporter, "what would you say to critics who believe you've revealed too much about your personal struggles?" Catherine paused, considering her answer carefully. She had anticipated this question and had thought deeply about how to respond. "I would say that sharing our struggles doesn't make us weak, it makes us human," she replied clearly. "And if being human helps other people feel less alone in their own struggles, then I believe that's exactly what public service should look like." The answer was quoted in newspapers around the world the next day, further cementing Catherine's transformation from dutiful royal to authentic leader. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came during a private visit to the women's shelter where she had been working behind the scenes for years. Maria Santos, the director, pulled Catherine aside for a quiet conversation. "You know what's changed since your article came out?" Maria asked with a smile. "The women here don't see you as someone who's helping them out of obligation anymore. They see you as someone who understands that life can knock any of us down, regardless of our circumstances." Catherine felt tears welling up as Maria continued. "Yesterday, one of our residents said something that stayed with me. She said, if a princess can admit she struggled and needed help, then maybe it's okay for me to need help too. You've given them permission to be imperfect while they're healing." Standing in that shelter, surrounded by women who were rebuilding their lives with courage, Catherine could barely fathom. She finally understood the full impact of what she had done. The Vogue article hadn't just shared her story, it had created space for countless other stories to be told and honored. As Catherine drove home that evening, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The cancer diagnosis that had forced her to confront her own mortality, the realization that life was too precious to waste on pretense, the decision to risk vulnerability for the sake of authentic connection, it had all led to this transformation. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah Mitchell at Vogue. "Catherine, thought you should know, we've been contacted by publishers around the world wanting to translate the article. Your story is reaching people in languages and countries we never expected. You've started something much bigger than either of us imagined." Catherine smiled, thinking about all the women around the world who might be reading her words and feeling less alone in their own struggles. She had finally learned the difference between being perfect and being real, and in choosing reality over perfection, she had found her true purpose as a royal and as a human being. The transformation was complete, but Catherine knew it was also just the beginning.